So, have you ever tried to ditch a habit smoking, procrastinating, overeating only to hear this little voice in your head going, nah, let's not do that right now? You're stressed? You deserve a break?
All the time. What fascinates me is how those excuses pop up automatically, like they're on a loop. Sometimes I wonder if they're even my own thoughts or just some built-in script.
Exactly. It's almost like there's a part of us running interference, making sure we don't mess with its comfort zone. But what's really going on there?
That's the crazy part. We tend to think it's just laziness or a lack of willpower, but what if it's deeper than that? What if it's an organized system in our mind?
So here's where the concept of neuro-entity comes in. This isn't just some poetic metaphor. It's an actual structure in your psyche, acting almost like its own character.
I love that idea, a part of your mind with its own needs, emotions, even strategies. It's like every habit you have is being run by its own little manager behind the scenes.
Yeah, and in the case of smoking, for example, it's not simply reaching for a cigarette. There's this whole inner persona, using cigarettes to manage stress or avoid discomfort.
That actually makes so much sense. It explains why you can't just outlogic yourself or use brute force. You're up against a system, not just a fleeting urge.
Now, when you finally decide to quit the habit, that neuroentity doesn't just roll over. It feels threatened, like it's about to lose its job.
Absolutely, and that's when you start feeling this strange resistance, almost like a part of you is defending itself, pulling out every trick in the book to keep things the same.
It's wild, right? You think you're fighting yourself, but really, you're facing down this whole inner network that wants to protect its territory.
And the more you push, the more creative the resistance gets. Suddenly, every excuse sounds totally reasonable.
So, let's talk about these tricks, what the NEDS approach calls neuroparasites. These aren't just random thoughts. They're patterns the neuroentity uses to survive.
I've definitely recognized those rationalizations, doubts, even justifications that sneak in when I'm about to make a change. They feel like my thoughts, but they're oddly persistent.
Right. Stuff like, you'll be too anxious without this. Or, now's not the right time. They're not facts, but they masquerade as legitimate reasons.
It's almost like mental smoke and mirrors, making it so hard to tell what's truly you and what's just the habit defending itself.
Picture someone who smoked for years. They try to quit, and it's not just cravings they suddenly hear. The damage is done, or you won't function without it.
That's so true. Those voices really aren't facts. They're like persuasive sales pitches from the neuro-entity. It's almost like the habit is arguing for its own survival.
Exactly. That's what makes it so tough. You're not just dealing with physical withdrawal, but a whole psychological campaign to keep the status quo.
Honestly, understanding that makes it feel less like a personal failure and more like a challenge to outsmart this inner system.
That's the key. So many people beat themselves up for lacking willpower, when really they're up against something with its own structure and strategy.
Yeah, and no wonder brute force rarely works. You're battling a whole network, not just a single bad impulse. It almost feels unfair when you put it that way.
But it's actually empowering, too. Once you see the habit as an organized system, you realize there are ways to work with or around it, instead of just fighting blindly.
That actually gives me hope. If you can understand the system, maybe you can find its weak spots and finally break free.
So, how do you actually spot these neuroentities in action? It starts with paying attention to those recurring inner voices and patterns.
I've noticed that when I try to change something, the same excuses show up almost like clockwork. That's a huge clue. Repetition is their signature move.
Totally. And when you notice thoughts that don't quite match your conscious goals, that's often the neuroentity at work.
So, it's less about blaming yourself and more about getting curious, like, who's really talking here? Me or my old habit?
And here's where the magic happens. Just recognizing that these patterns exist starts to weaken their grip. It's almost like shining a flashlight on something hiding in the dark.
That's such a good image. Once you catch the neuro-entity in the act, it loses a bit of its power. Suddenly, those excuses don't seem quite as convincing.
Exactly, and you're no longer just getting swept along. You can pause, observe, and decide how you actually want to respond.
It's a little like seeing the strings behind the puppet show. Once you notice them, the illusion loses its hold.
What's cool is, the NEDS approach isn't about fighting these systems head-on. It's about illuminating and transforming them, so you're not stuck in endless struggle.
That's way less exhausting than trying to willpower your way through. Once the neuro-entity is brought into the open, you can actually shift the energy it was holding.
And that's where lasting change happens, not with force, but with understanding and release. It's a different way of thinking about breaking habits.
Honestly, it feels almost hopeful, like maybe change doesn't have to be a constant battle after all.
So, if someone wants to try this, what's a first step? Is it as simple as just noticing those inner voices and patterns?
Noticing is a powerful start, but then gently questioning those patterns, is this really me, or is it the neuro-entity, can help loosen their grip. Sometimes writing the thoughts down makes them easier to spot.
I like that kind of inner detective work. And over time, that awareness builds up, making it harder for the old system to run the show.
Eventually, the idea is to transform the energy behind the habit, so it's no longer trapped in that old loop. That's when real, lasting freedom starts to show up.
Funny how our minds can feel like a landscape of different characters, each with their own agendas. But maybe, by recognizing these neuro-entities, we can finally move from struggle to actual change.
What I find most encouraging is that it's not about beating yourself up, but about understanding your own mind on a deeper level. That's a game changer.
And with that, changing habits stops being a war and becomes more of a journey, one where every step forward is a kind of self-liberation.
That's the kind of freedom I think most of us are really after, not just quitting a bad habit, but actually reclaiming our own energy for something better.